Alright, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PlayerSToo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, it just helps us out even more. And if you've already done that for us, thank you so much. I cannot overstate how helpful that is to us and how much it means to us. So thank you very much for doing that. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, still in his lockdown cupboard, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
It's going very well, Mark. Glad to be here again. Yeah, I am still in lockdown cupboard, although lockdown cupboard has changed somehow, and I have managed to get an actual desk like a real person would have into this podcasting space. So, yeah, I can properly sit up now, and it's not an uncomfortable stress to be here.
Well, that's good, man. I can still see that the old mattress remains in the cupboard, just to your right.
That's
but
my
nonetheless,
soundproofing.
I'm glad that it has improved for you. But Lewis, what have you been playing this week?
Well, Mark, partly I've lost a lot of gaming time because of this big tidy-up job, but I have finished Super Mario Galaxy.
Well, hey.
Which I was very close to basically last week when we were recording. I only had a couple of the kind of main moons still to get. And none of my criticisms really have gone away, to be honest. It is, at its core, a really fun, a really inventive, a classic Mario game. It just does everything that you could want from a Mario game. But man, it is so badly hampered by the camera, first and foremost, by some of the motion controls. We talked about this a bit back before the collection came out, about the fact that we sort of thought we were getting remasters and we basically have only got ports.
Yeah.
And man, it shows like they really didn't do anything to that game to make it better. And I think if it played like Odyssey, it would be up there with Odyssey, and it just really doesn't.
So, in terms of how you feel about the game in that capacity then, was it a little bit disappointing for you?
I guess I have to say it was, yeah. I didn't feel disappointed while playing it because, as I say, when it's good, when it gets things right, it is really superb. Some of the puzzles that you have to solve, some of the secrets that you can find, it's great fun. It's like exactly what Odyssey was doing, and that, for anyone who isn't aware, like that was my first entry into Mario, really, was playing Mario Odyssey when I got a Switch. So I was looking for more of that, and it definitely has that at its core, but there's just some real flaws in the execution, which could, to my mind, have been fixed by Nintendo for this release, and they didn't. I was having a bit of conversation on our social media with a few different people who have been playing the game as well, and they were saying that 64 and Sunshine also have potentially worse issues with camera and controls. I think that the issues might be different because obviously 64 was like the first entry into a 3D game essentially for the Mario franchise.
Defined the 3D platformer, didn't it, when it came out? Yeah.
And I can imagine that the camera issues in that game will be all about where the camera is positioned and just make some jumps harder. But Galaxy has that plus more. And so I'm really hoping that the other games in the collection aren't as bad for me, but I am a little bit frustrated that it wasn't this absolutely knockout experience, which I was kind of expecting. But, I'm still glad to have played it. And beyond that, I've just been continuing my playthrough of Hollow Knight, which is still going pretty much as badly as it seemed to be going last week. I eventually had to abandon my contest with the Mantis Lords. Just couldn't do it and wasn't willing to put any more effort into it. I will return. There's an in-game prompt to go somewhere else first and get another item or some upgrade and then return and take them on. So I'm broadly following that now. Again, like having moved on from that section, which was just kicking my arse and was making me feel quite miserable about playing it, I'm on to the next section of the game, and the exploration and the enemies that I'm fighting there and the sense of this world unfolding and the story unfolding with it is great, and that's what I'm here for. So I just want more of that and less of getting slaughtered and having to climb my way back to a boss fight that I then lose within about 10 seconds again.
Well, Lewis, it's going to happen. I'm not going to lie to you, mate. It's definitely going to happen in this game without a shadow of a doubt.
What about you? What have you been playing?
Well, Lewis, speaking of difficult games, I have just been continuing my playthrough of Bloodborne. And in actual fact, I'm sort of in the home straight now. I've been semi-following a guide just to make sure that I'm on the right path, sort of thing. And due to looking ahead slightly in the guide, I now know that I am coming into the home stretch, which is actually really, really exciting. Like, that's really, really great. But honestly, Lewis, I'm not sure what's happened, but I'm now absolutely fucking loving it. It is so unbelievably good. It is way better than I was even giving it credit for before. And I think that you almost have to get to a certain point in the game before you can really appreciate just how incredibly fucking good it is. Even in terms of like enemy variety, and the quality of each of those varieties is just so incredibly high. The level design is out of this world amazing. Absolutely incredibly good. And again, it does that same thing that I love so much about Hollow Knight. It does a lot of show don't tell storytelling. In fact, almost to its detriment sometimes, where you don't really understand what's going on until you pick up some random piece of information and you're thinking, oh, is that what's happening? It's just fantastic, man. It really is very, very good indeed. I'm actually falling for it a lot more than I thought that I was going to.
Good, yeah.
And even when I started playing it, I never thought that I was going to like it as much as it turns out that I have. In terms of the difficulty, I think I said last week or the week before, you get to a point where the sort of general enemies, the standard enemies in and around the level, don't really cause you so much of an issue as they did in the beginning of the game, where everything just appears very, very difficult to you. But when you start to know what you're doing, these enemies become trivial a lot of the time, and you would only really die at boss fights, or that was certainly what I was finding. But as I've moved on in the game, that's almost been flipped on its head a little bit, and the sort of middle part of the game, I actually found that I was flying through some of the boss fights, and I was texting you saying that I'd beat a few of them first time. But the environments at those stages were absolutely brutal and were really, really difficult, and I died way more just traversing a level than I did actually fighting the bosses, which I thought was quite interesting in and of itself. However, having said that, oh yeah, I was beating all these bosses first time. I've now got to a point where the boss that I'm facing right now is absolutely smoking me every single time just about where I go into the fight. So I might have to grind a little bit and level up to come back to that.
Nice. I mean, it sounds like you're making crazy progress.
Well, yeah, I definitely am making more progress than I thought I would have done. But now being on the home stretch, I can now fully see that light at the end of the tunnel. It's also worth pointing out that I don't think that the boss that I am currently fighting is necessary to complete the game. So I actually probably could go on and complete the game relatively easily. But the boss that I'm fighting right now is among the most difficult in the game, if not the most difficult in the game, like by general consensus.
Yeah.
So I don't mind that I'm dying a bit at this, because honestly, and this is going to sound like a really weird complaint, I was getting annoyed that I wasn't dying enough at the bosses, because I was kind of like, I thought this game was supposed to be super hard. It's all about it's like super hard bosses, and I've just beat, I think it was 3 out of the past 4 I beat first time, and even that one where I died, I think I only died once or maybe twice, and then beat that one as well. And I was kind of thinking, oh, the bosses have kind of got a little bit easier here. I mean, the boss designs are just fantastic though. They really are just excellent. You just execute what you have to do and then they will fall, sort of thing. Whereas the boss that I'm fighting now, to me, appears a bit more dynamic. And also they have this horrific attack where it will kill you first time. And every single time that I fought this boss, it has killed me in exactly the same way, where I'm doing basically quite well, and then they have this attack that you have to dodge pretty well to avoid, and I have failed every single time of asking, and it has killed me. So that has been pretty disappointing. But other than that, it's been really good, and I'm actually kind of glad for the renewed challenge, because I don't know if I just maybe like leveled up too much or whatever, but I was finding a lot of the bosses, again, in comparison to the environments that they were in, some of which were really very challenging indeed, really, really challenging. The boss fight at the end of that really, really challenging area was more trivial than I would have liked it to have been, if that makes sense. Like, it was less of a challenge than I wanted it to be. But, I mean, that's a complaint that lasted for maybe about an hour, and then I fought this boss, who's now killing me, and the environment is also very, very difficult. So, there you go. They've now went from bosses being the most difficult thing in the game, to environments being the most difficult thing in the game, to both of them just being incredibly fucking solid. So, yeah. But it's been really, really, really fun going through it, actually. It's been way more fun as well than I thought that it was going to be. And the challenge was really, really fun in and of itself. I'm really loving it. I really genuinely am. It's a fantastic game, and I can fully understand now at this point why it's some people's favourite game of all time. It's definitely worthy of that mantle, I can say. It's not my favourite game of all time, just to be absolutely clear, but I can definitely understand why people view it in that light, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be interested to see where you land on that kind of debate by the time you finish it. I'm quite struck there that you're saying like that you have grown to like it a lot more even after like a specific point in the game. I'll wait till you've actually finished the game to ask you some of these questions, I think, because I'm really interested as someone who, a bit like you, wants to play it, is kind of trying to find some time in the future where I would put the effort in for it, although maybe Hollow Knight is evidence that I shouldn't do that. But
you should, man. You should definitely persevere share with these hard games.
I would really like to, yeah.
The reward that you get when you do something that's really difficult and you just fucking nail it. And in Hollow Knight and in Bloodborne, do that in such a way that other games really don't. Like, you can do really, really difficult things in games, and at the end of it, you're like, oh, thank God that's over. And you can do really, really difficult things in games like what I found in Hollow Knight and what I'm finding in Bloodborne, and you finish it and you're like, yes, I am a god. You know what I mean? You just have such an amazing sense of satisfaction, you know? I just think that this game does that so well. So incredibly well. And I don't know what it is about the formula. Miyazaki has some magic, I think, that he sprinkles over his games to make this true. But man, it is so gratifying when you just nail a section that is really difficult, or really go in and nail a boss and execute your plan to perfection. You know, it's just fantastic.
Good stuff.
All right, Liz, and with that gushing over Bloodborne, it's time for the news. All right, and news item number 1, Lewis. Some devs have said that the significant reduction in spec of the Series S could be presenting them some problems in development. The most recent of which is David Cage, famous for being David Cage, and also the CEO and co-founder of Quantic Dreams, who has said this.
Many developers prefer consoles to PC because on consoles you only have to deal with one hardware, whereas on PC there are so many configurations, graphic cards, drivers, controllers, etc. that makes the development much more complex. When a manufacturer offers 2 consoles with different specs, there is a strong chance that most developers will focus on the lower end version to avoid doing 2 different versions. I must confess that I am really not a big fan of this situation. I think it's confusing for developers, but also for players, and although I can understand the commercial reasons behind this choice, a difference of €200 on the street price, I think the situation is questionable. Regarding Quantic Dream, as we develop our own technology and engines, we are determined to optimise our titles for each platform. Being now a PC developer, we are implementing scalable features based on the platform, which is very helpful to highlight what the hardware has best to offer.
So this also comes after id Software lead engine programmer Bill Cannon has said that the RAM shortcomings of the Series S could be particularly difficult to compensate for in comparison to the PS5 and the Series X. So, Lewis, once again, here we are talking about how the simple fact of releasing a less powerful console will hamper the games, and now it seems to be the devs themselves that are saying this. David Cage going as far as to say that he actively doesn't like this and doesn't seem to like the implications on the developer side, you know?
Yeah, exactly that, Mark. It's interesting that this is kind of the conversation that we've been having, and that a lot of gamers generally have been having around this whole strategy from Xbox. Is the lower SKU going to hold things back? Is there an issue there? I mean, that all began obviously with the idea that it had to be cross-gen as well as having 2 platform SKUs within the generation itself. But to have the weight of developer voices added to this is an interesting and a slightly worrying thing, because as someone who was definitely getting a Series S rather than an X because of exactly where I see it fitting into my kind of gaming ecosystem, for want of a better word, I'm not looking for the highest quality graphics or power from this machine at all. That's not what I'd be going for it for. But if it's holding back the rest of the development stream for other games, that if they're limiting what people can actually do with this generation, then I have a lot of problems with that, you know? And it sounds like this is exactly what developers are starting to say.
Yeah, absolutely. David Cage specifically seems to be saying that devs will just aim for that lower spec of the Series S rather than having to do additional work to make scalable assets or whatever to fully take advantage of the power of the next gen of the PS5 and of the Series X. And to that, I would say, sort of fair enough. I mean, if you're asking them to do a lot of work in the first place to develop a game, I don't know how much extra effort you would have to make all new assets or make them scalable in the way that David Cage is talking about to go from the Series S to the Series X. But I reckon that is not a trivial amount of work, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he would be saying it, basically, if it was easy enough to scale these things from one to the other on the developer side, there wouldn't be a conversation to be had here, right? It must be that it's posing some challenges. I think your man from id Software in particular, that tweet had to be deleted. Well, quotes, had to be deleted. It was deleted. Notably, id Software is bound up in the Bethesda deal from Xbox. So
yeah, we should say that comment came before the purchase of Bethesda by Xbox.
I mean, I think that's an interesting thing as well. I mean, how could we possibly know? But if there is something there where Xbox have said to them, delete that tweet, we don't want people talking about that, then maybe there is an issue. I can't see really why Xbox haven't kind of come out and responded to some of this, unless there is some truth in it and they just don't view it as a big enough issue or a big enough concern.
My problem with it is that longevity of the console might not be what I want it to be. That's really what's giving me pause on buying a Series S, because when the Series S came out, I was like, there's almost no way that I'm not going to buy this. But if it means that next year or the year after, games are suddenly being made that will not run on the Series S due to the limitations of the hardware, then that sucks. That's where we're getting into this horrible division in Xbox players on the S and on the X. If it does go down that road where there will be some games that are only available on the Xbox Series X, then that is going to suck for a lot of people. Particularly, it's going to suck for a lot of people who bought the cheaper console, probably because they couldn't afford the more expensive one, you know?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's such a bigger issue within all of that anyway. But I do think that then depends on what you're looking for the Series S to do. And, you know, in 5 years' time or in 7 years' time towards the end of the generation that's coming up, if we're in a position where some games aren't across both SKUs, that'll be a problem. But maybe by then there'll be kind of options around that. But if that moment comes a lot sooner, and I don't really think that it will, to be fair, I think that both consoles will be able to run things just fine for a good long while yet. But if that moment comes sooner in the generation than we might expect it, say 3 years from now, you know, in the same way that we're talking about a Switch upgrade being kind of required at the moment, if that's what the Series S is, then you start to ask questions about this strategy, I think.
Well, to be honest with you, you bring up an interesting point there, because if it's okay for the Switch to bring out a Pro version, then aren't Xbox doing a similar thing here? Do you know what I mean? We're 3 years into the life cycle of the Switch, basically, and they're doing the same thing. They're providing an upgrade, and if 2 years from now there are games that are only available on the quotes Switch Pro and not on the original Switch, would you feel that you got enough life out of your original Switch for that to be worth it? The question would then have to be asked of the Xbox Series S when you originally bought it. If 3 years down the line games start to be being made that cannot run on the S, like, is that enough lifeline for your console for the price that you're paying for it, you know?
I mean, I can't say that 3 years is enough, no, but 5 years might be pushing it just about towards acceptability. I would love to see, you know, very consumer-friendly Xbox make some interesting moves if that were to be the case, like a cheaper upgrade scheme, you know, return your current Series S and only pay £100 to get the upgrade. Something like that would be good.
Yeah, something like
that
would be great, actually. Yeah, that'd be really good. Well, let's hope that the Xbox Series S has a long lifeline for the people that have already pre-ordered it. Certainly. And if they are going to do a sort of iPhone-esque upgrade to the Series S, then there is some compensation for those people that bought the original, you know? Mm-hmm. All right, and news item number 2. And speaking of Xbox, Phil Spencer has told employees at an all-hands meeting that they would be bringing Games Pass to iOS and are targeting a 2021 release. Apparently, he told employees, we absolutely will end up on iOS, which is quite encouraging as someone who now owns Games Pass Ultimate, which comes with xCloud, which I would quite like to use, but currently cannot. Crucially, I think, in this as well, is that they would be providing a direct browser-based solution, which is a really dumb way of saying that they're going to be using a web app, similarly to what Amazon's Luna was going to be using, and was something that we spoke about when Amazon announced Luna, was that they were going to be on iOS through this web-based app, which sort of got round the terms and conditions that Apple have for their App Store. Worth pointing out as well that Spencer also said that xCloud would be coming to PC, no mention of Macs, but would be coming to PC next year, so you will be able to use your xCloud streaming as part of your Games Pass subscription on PC as well, coming next year, but of course that always was coming, wasn't it? So Lewis, it definitely did not take Microsoft long to jump on the idea that Luna proposed to get around Apple's App Store, but still to have effectively an app on an iPhone. And honestly, I sort of struggle to believe that Apple are going to continue to let these companies get away with it. As I understand it, Amazon and Apple had sort of worked together or have some sort of agreement whereby this will be allowed for Amazon. So it will be very interesting to see if those same allowances will be given to Microsoft and Xbox.
Well, absolutely, yeah. It's really difficult to see how a distinction between these two services can be drawn, really. So if Apple's going to allow one to be delivered in this web app-based way, I cannot find an argument that would allow them to prevent Microsoft from doing that.
I'm sure Apple will find one.
Well,
I'm sure they'll find one.
They do get creative and they're protecting the walled garden, that's for sure. But, it begs the question, like, will they just shut down the whole notion of this being allowed and thereby hurt Luna? Yeah, or will they try and find some way through that? We're already in legal proceedings between Epic and Apple. It's impossible to think that Microsoft wouldn't launch something similar if Amazon were allowed to do a thing and they weren't allowed to do the exact same thing. I don't know. I can't see how that could be possible.
I must admit, it is very confidence-inducing hearing Phil Spencer tell his employees that they will be on iOS. Some way or somehow, they seem to be finding a way to get themselves onto iOS. And I really don't think that they could deny xCloud having a web-based app similarly to what Luna has proposed without there being some sort of legal proceedings around that, because that is straight up anti-competition at that point. Like, you are giving your platform wholly to Amazon to provide a service which is nearly identical to xCloud, but denying Microsoft doing exactly the same thing. And I really don't know how they could possibly get away with that legally, All right, Lewis, news item number 3. The Avengers game is struggling to retain its players only a little over a month after the game was released. The concurrent player count on PC has dipped below 1,000 players, which has caused major matchmaking issues, which has only been further exacerbated by the way the game itself does its matchmaking. And even on PS4, which is the biggest platform for the game, you are quite likely, it seems, to be lumped with at least one AI teammate anytime you do any matchmaking. As well as this, there has also been no or little news of updates or fixes, and the communication between Crystal Dynamics and their player base has been not great, to say the least. The game still has some fairly major issues and has a severe lack of in-game content, but it seems as though the most frustrating thing is actually the lack of communication and the lack of a roadmap for the game. So in response to all this, Lewis, Crystal Dynamics head Scott Amos has made this statement over at Kotaku.
To our players, every day we fight to make the best game possible for our community. We have a great community management team at Crystal Dynamics and Square Enix who funnel all of your concerns, suggestions and feedback to the development team daily. We are listening. We are making fixes, improvements and additions as fast as we safely can to make Marvel's Avengers the game we all aspire it to be. As such, we have a number of new content pieces coming in the weeks ahead, including a totally new Warzone mission type called Tycon Rifts, a new outpost that's a jumping off point for the new story missions in the future, and AIM's Cloning Lab, which requires a coordinated high-level group of 4 players to beat with new top-end loot rewards for finishing it. And in each of these updates we do tuning and bug fixing to enhance the overall experience. In addition, we've announced 2 new heroes coming in the near future, Kate Bishop in Operation Taking Aim, and after that the double feature Operation starring Clinton Barton. This is the 2 Hawkeyes we mentioned in the last war table. These new operations pick up right from where the main Reassemble campaign ended in the core game and will propel the overall world story forward with new mysteries and villains, as well as new multiplayer content. Lastly, we will continue to add new content to the game in the coming months as we address issues and overall game balance, including loot distribution and quality of life features everyone is clamouring for to improve our day-to-day experience, from accessibility to co-op communication tools to balancing the economy. We're confident that we'll see PC players, as well as those on Xbox One and PlayStation 4, return to the game as we add exciting new late-game content and demonstrate that we continue to be focused on improving the game. We'll have more information and details about the very near content drops in a blog scheduled for next week, and we have new communication initiatives coming soon to even more directly share fun and useful information with you. Thank you for coming with us on this journey to truly realise the best of what Marvel's Avengers can become.
Now, before we get into that statement, I just want everyone to know that just before we started recording, I checked the number of concurrent players currently on Steam playing the Avengers, and it is 1,365, which is, for a game this size, not a lot at all. However, getting into the statement itself, to me this was very wishy-washy, and it's all coming and using language like in the coming weeks and all these things are very near. But you've been saying that for ages, right? They've been saying that for a long time. What we need is dates for this, or what the community needs is dates for this, and needs you to hit those dates as well. I think that this lack of communication really is half the battle when it comes to these live service games, and Anthem was massively criticised for this as well at the time. But I really think that this is half the problem, is that the devs just have to be very clear and communicate almost constantly with their player base, you know?
Particularly when it comes to, I mean, there's the content side, which is one aspect and a fairly major side, but on things like bugs and fixes and that kind of thing, absolutely there needs to be near constant communication, particularly in this first month. I mean, we are basically almost exactly a month on from release, and if players aren't feeling like their very basic concerns around playability issues and accessibility issues, which is mentioned specifically in that statement, those are big problems for the everyday experience of the game. And if you are someone who's gone out and spent the money on this, and you've put together your team and you've got your friends and you all want to play it together, and suddenly there's these issues that it just seems like Crystal Dynamics aren't bothering to deal with, even if they are, they're just not telling you that they are. Yeah, that's no good. And then you have to add in the fact that people don't know when the good content is coming either. It's just a double whammy.
Exactly, and I think with those concurrent numbers currently on PC, for them to say that they are confident that the PC players and Xbox and PS4 players will all just be flooding back when the new content arrives, I think is a very bold statement to make. A very bold statement to make indeed. And if the game is in this situation only a month after it launched, what's it going to look like in 6 months' time, or a year's time even? You know, I mean, this is supposed to be a long-term project for Square Enix and Crystal Dynamics, and it's looking to me that it's run out of steam only after a month, you know?
Well, absolutely, and you've got to factor into that long tail that they would have been hoping to have, that there's a generation change happening slap bang in the centre of that, which is going to bring all sorts of new issues and concerns for them, simply because there's going to be all sorts of new games that people want to be playing, and Avengers is probably going to seem older faster than it would do had it just released 2 years ago, if it was just on the same generation the whole time. But I totally agree with what you're saying there, Mark, that 6 months from now, will people be coming back? It always felt to me that the Crystal Dynamics plan for this wasn't actually such a bad one. They said before release that they would be putting effectively a new hero out. Felt like they said every month. I might be misremembering that, but that basically each month there would be a new character added, and that character would have a little block of story content and then would be available in all the kind of post-game stuff.
I don't know if they said that, but that would be a great way to do it.
I feel like they did say that. Again, I could be misremembering it, but and we know that there's a Spider-Man update to be had at some point because there was such a fracas around that. But
yeah, well, on the PS4 anyway. Yeah,
and so I can definitely see a world that people will return to it. But the problem, Mark, is, imagine you or I are playing it, and we've invested in it, and we're getting a bit bored, and we're playing some other stuff, and that's fine, that happens. But if we are coming back to play that Spider-Man update, and we play that together for a night or two, and then we're bored again, and then you're waiting another month for the next character. Like, the narrative of this game, when it released, was that the story was great, and that the multiplayer was not so great. So if every month you put out a little bit of story, and everyone plays that for 2 or 3 hours, finishes it, and then goes, there's still nothing, there's nothing here to do now, then they've got a massive problem on their hands.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the end game content for service games like this is so crucial, and it seems to be a massive swing and a miss here for Marvel's Avengers, unfortunately. But let's hope they turn it around, because crazier things have happened in the service games world, let's be honest. All right, and news item number 4, Lewis. Amazon are shutting down their free-to-play MOBA-style game Crucible. Crucible launched in May this year, and in June they retired 2 out of the 3 game modes, and then they, quotes, unreleased the game last month and put it back into a closed beta stage. But now they have scrapped the game entirely. Amazon Games have made this statement over on the Crucible website.
Essence Hunters. In July, we moved Crucible into closed beta. We made a list of features we felt would enhance the player experience, which we shared publicly on our roadmap, and with the exception of custom games, which we expect to ship in the coming days, we completed them all. With those features shipped, our next step was to evaluate the feedback we've heard from you, paired with the data we've collected to determine our path forward. That evaluation led us to a difficult decision. We'll be discontinuing development on Crucible. We very much appreciate the way that our fans have rallied around our efforts, and we've loved seeing your responses to the changes we've made over the last few months. But ultimately, we didn't see a healthy, sustainable future ahead of Crucible. We'll be transitioning our team to focus on New World and other upcoming projects from Amazon Games. We're offering a full refund for any purchases made. You can find more information on our support page. We will also be disabling credit purchases within Crucible. In the next few weeks, we'll be hosting a final playtest and community celebration, both in-game and in our official Discord. After that point, we'll be disabling matchmaking, although you'll still be able to play Crucible through the custom games feature. Stay tuned for more information on that event. Servers will stay up for custom games until noon PST on Monday the 9th of November. Thank you, as always, for being part of our community. This has been a labour of love, and we're grateful for the time we got to spend on Planet Crucible with you. Signing off once more, the Crucible team.
So, very good. It has to be said right off the bat that they are offering refunds for any purchases made, which is excellent, because anyone who did purchase this game has had very, very little opportunity to play it. And also interesting that they are pointing out that they will still be developing their MMO game, New Worlds, which has yet to have a release date. My initial thoughts on Crucible are, why don't I know anything about Crucible? Because this is Amazon. They are one of the biggest companies in the world, and this was their first real jump into game development. And I know nothing about this game. I am very plugged into the gamer scene because I have a podcast and I sort of have to be. And I know nothing at all about Crucible. There's been no marketing, no push at all from Amazon to get eyes in front of this game. And now it's just been a waste of what I can only assume is thousands of man hours and development time completely down the toilet for a game that was out for 6 months? It's just madness.
It's one of the most remarkable stories I can remember us ever talking about on this podcast, Mark. I don't think I can remember a game like this being fully released. This isn't something that's been in beta for a while and it's just not worked out and they've pulled it. This game was available to play and people, well, not enough people were playing it. And now it's been retracted and binned. It's stunning. And just to echo what you were saying, yeah, it's good that they have moved the team from Crucible onto New World and quote-unquote other projects, because that, well, in theory, it means no job losses, right, which is to be applauded. But yeah, this was in development for like 5 or 6 years, and that work is just gone. It hasn't achieved anything, and that's so strange.
Yeah, and quite a sad story, really. And honestly, it doesn't give me much hope for New World either, does it? But my main question, Lewis, is how do you think this reflects on Luna as a service? Because that is obviously Amazon's new shiny push into video games. Or I suppose more accurately, how do you think this reflects on Amazon's dedication to gaming?
I'm really glad you asked this, Mark, and I didn't know that you were going to, because I've been thinking about this a lot over the last few days. And yeah, I would be nervous about it. It makes me feel a bit like how we spoke about Stadia and Google and all the risk around the potential that Google would just drop that if it wasn't working. And I don't see anything from Amazon to suggest that they are any better equipped to break into gaming. At the moment, they have 4 games, if we include Crucible. They had Crucible, they're developing New World, there's a Pac-Man game, which basically seems to be Pac-Man that can be played directly in Twitch rather than anywhere else. And they also have the Grand Tour game, the Jeremy Clarkson vehicle. Yeah, that is on 52 on Metacritic at the moment, and Crucible was on 56. Now, that tells you that as a development and a publishing side of things, they don't have a clue what they're doing, really. I mean, that is a bad suite of games. I was reading a great article on Forbes, which I'll post in the show notes on PlayersToo.com, that was basically saying that New World does not look like it is coming along well at all, and was kind of drawing the comparison to Crucible. And yeah, that they haven't marketed these things properly. They didn't use Twitch, their own platform, to properly market
Considering
Crucible.
how we've seen how effectively Apex Legends used Twitch and streamers particularly to launch that game with such gusto, and Crucible is just launched with such an unbelievable whimper that I basically forgot that it happened.
But exactly. This article as well mentions Valorant, which used Twitch to the extent that it was like you had to watch people playing on Twitch and they could drop codes for the game to you. That was the first entry point for people, was watching other people play on Twitch. So you had an understanding of the game and then you could get a code and then you could dive in and play it. Why didn't they do any of that stuff with this? They weren't even running adverts. This is Amazon. This is one of the biggest companies on earth. They have the ability to buy up all of the marketing share if they wanted to, and it just feels like they don't care about this, and this is their first real game, and that worries me if they really think that Luna is going to take off in any major way, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is baffling that they have this incredible platform there, full of gamers, full of exclusively gamers, that they just didn't use at all. And we've subsequently seen other companies use that tool way better than Amazon have. It's slightly baffling, it definitely is. And also the sort of underwhelming way with which they announced Luna as well. I don't know, it speaks towards an attitude towards this, doesn't it? Which is, this isn't the most important thing to us, which it almost certainly isn't. But fucking hell, at least pretend you care.
Yeah, well,
you know what I mean?
it.
If you want us to care, you at least need to pretend to be caring. You know?
Yeah, if it's not important to them, why bother? Basically, just, we don't need you then.
Yeah, exactly, we've got enough stuff. But if you want to break into this market, you have to make us care.
Yeah.
And for that to happen, we have to believe that you care, even if you don't.
Exactly.
All right, listen, finishing off as we always do with a couple of shout-outs. Shout-out number 1, Lewis. Mortal Kombat 11 has announced 3 new DLC characters. These include classics Rain and Melina. Melina, who definitely should have been in the game from the get-go, by the way. And also John Rambo, just because, why not? They have also unveiled an Ultimate Edition of the game, which will include the base game, the Combat Pack 1, Aftermath, and the Combat Pack 2. However, due to there now being an ultimate version of the game, the speculation seems to be that this will be the last DLC for Mortal Kombat 11. So unfortunately, that means no more DLC characters, which means no Ash from the Evil Dead, which means no Sector, no Smoke, and no Harlequin, all of which have been rumoured for various amounts of time. But I think that we can say that the game has been supported pretty well over its, what is it, year and a half or whatever that it's
pretty
been
much,
out.
Yeah.
I think that it's been supported pretty well. They've got a whole extra bunch of story stuff in the Aftermath pack, and as well they've got these 2 combat packs on top of that as well. So there's been a lot of additional content for Mortal Kombat 11 and for fans of that game. So yeah, I mean, valiant effort, I will say, for NetherRealm.
I mean, you could always ask for more characters, right? But like you say, there's plenty there. NetherRealm have done a really good job of keeping that game alive and giving players a good reason to come back after everything we've just been talking about. So, fair play.
Yeah, definitely. Alright, shout out number 2. Rockstar have bought Ruffian Games and will be rebranding them Rockstar Dundee. Ruffian Games had previously made Crackdown 2, notably. Dundee obviously being in Scotland, and it's always nice to see a studio in Scotland doing well, assuming that this is a good thing for the studio. Hope that it's a good thing for the studio. Ruffian Games themselves were actually made up of ex-DMA Design employees, which was the predecessor of Rockstar North, which is obviously famous for all of the GTA games and is based in Edinburgh, also in Scotland. However, personally, I wouldn't be expecting any new games from Rockstar Dundee anytime soon. I would very much think that they would be a support studio for Rockstar North, because they are pretty close. If no one knows the geography of Scotland, which why would you? They're pretty close. I think they're about an hour and a half in the train max,
if even. Yeah.
And I can see Rockstar Dundee being absorbed into Rockstar North at some point in the very near future, honestly.
Yeah, but it is great, like a good opportunity for those people if they get to be involved in the GTA franchise again. Like, that's superb. So and it's just good to know that development in Scotland is still strong. We've always had a good reputation, particularly Dundee, so good on them.
Absolutely. And also this might be indicative that Rockstar North are in fact ramping up development of GTA 6 whenever that is going to be coming out, you know? So exciting stuff there. Alright, shout out number 3. PlayStation have now answered a lot of the questions around how you will play PS4 games on the PS5. So a lot of questions around backwards compatibility. However, this also includes how digital and physical PS4 games will be upgraded to their PS5 versions, or their upgraded versions, whatever we're calling that. On top of that, they have also released a list of games that will not be backwards compatible on the PS5. There's a grand total of 10 games on this list. Of all the thousands of games on the PS Store, there are 10 that we know of that definitely don't work. These are DWVR, Afro Samurai 2, TT Isle of Man, Riding on the Edge 2, Just Deal With It, Shadow Complex Remastered, Robinson, The Journey, We Sing, Hitman Go, Definitive Edition, Shadwin, and Joe's Diner. Now, I don't think any of those games are going to be a deal breaker for anyone personally. Obviously, there could be more games out there that don't work on the PS5. I doubt that PlayStation have tested every single game on the PlayStation Store, but I think that we can now safely say that the vast, vast majority of the thousands of games available on the PlayStation 4 will work on the PlayStation 5 and will be backwards compatible. So, Lewis, while obviously this is good news, the messaging from PlayStation around this has been god-awful. This is basically the same as what Xbox have done, right? Basically everything that you could ever play on an Xbox One, or even the previous generations before that, you can now play on a Series X or S. Why didn't PlayStation just say basically the same thing about the PlayStation 4? Xbox can't know that every single game is going to work without fault. You know what I mean? They can't possibly know that. But they don't have to say that. They don't have to cast so much doubt over it in the way that PlayStation did. Because the messaging around this initially started with Mark Cerny saying something along the lines of they tested the top 100 games from the PlayStation Store on the PlayStation 5 to see if they would work backwards compatible, and they all did. However, he said that in such a way that made it seem like it was only those top 100 games that were going to be backwards compatible. And then they sort of updated that statement to be like, most of the games will be backwards compatible. But what does most mean? Is most like 51%, 60% of the games? But no, is it somewhere it looks like in the 99th percentile of all the games on the PlayStation Store are going to work on the PlayStation 5. It's just crazy to me that they've went about this backwards compatibility issue in such a bizarre way, because ultimately long term I don't think that the backwards compatibility thing is really that big a deal, although I think backwards compatibility in this generational Switch is probably a bigger deal than it has been in previous generational Switches, just because of service games and things like that. But nonetheless, it matters to a lot of people now, and you should have been talking about it now, and it shouldn't have been a month before the console arrived. This should have been clear from day one, you know?
Yeah, and particularly when the competitor, i.e. Xbox, is talking about this a lot. Even if Sony and PlayStation don't think it's going to be a substantial issue or that most gamers are going to take advantage of it even, you have to know what the audience is discussing and you have to speak to that. You don't get to just tell people what you want them to know. If everyone is saying, can this game be played? You have to have a strong answer to that. And yeah, it seems like they had a good answer to it eventually, but they've just botched it over the last 4 or 5 months or whatever when they've been talking about it. Very strange. It feels like a backward step from Sony in some ways.
Yeah, to me, this is a positive story from PlayStation, but I'm still annoyed. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I'm still annoyed about the way that they've gone about this. Like, this is undoubtedly good news, but I'm annoyed about it because of the stupid way that they've gone about telling us. It's baffling, honestly. Some of the messaging from PlayStation over the past months has been truly bewildering, Lewis. Truly bewildering. All right, Lewis, and with that, I think it's time for a beer, and then we will be back with Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is a discussion around what service games are getting wrong, Lewis.
It is indeed, Mark. Yeah, I mean, this is just based on the back of our discussions earlier around Marvel's Avengers and around Crucible, and also to hark back a week or two ago when we were talking about Hyperscape. Basically, they have announced that they are having to rework that game to make it successful or viable. And it just led me to think about other games that we've seen come out over the last few years that have really struggled to nail getting an audience, retaining an audience, basically the core function of what the game is. So we're talking about live service games, but these incorporate all sorts of different types of games, I guess, and also different issues. So there's never one answer to this. I mean, part of the issue with Crucible is that Amazon didn't market it, right? But also, to my mind, there are quite fundamental flaws in the live service approach to games. And so I'll throw some games out to you and also throw in some contrasts about games that have done it better. And I just want to open up a discussion about what might need to change about the development cycles and the publishing of these games, particularly when we're starting to look at next gen, also looking at how some of these more successful games have tried different models and what might be able to be used by developers and publishers in the future. So obviously, yeah, we're talking about Avengers, we're talking about Crucible, Hyperscape, Anthem, Mark, God almighty, Anthem, Fallout 76, The Division 2 to a certain extent, which, you know, Ubisoft had to change some things about their own company structure because of the lack of success, of Division 2, and Ghost Recon Breakpoint to a lesser extent, and Battleborn, which was like a massive flop and kind of disappeared quite quickly.
Yeah, massive, yeah.
What is it that games like this are getting wrong, generally speaking, do you think?
Well, I think looking back over the years, thinking of the two big ones that were massive flops in recent memory, and that is Anthem and Fallout 76, and they both came out relatively close to one another and were both service games and were both absolutely dreadful out the gate. And I think that can be a nail in the coffin just to begin with, because Fallout 76 is still going. People still play Fallout 76. Yeah. But it's nowhere near what Bethesda envisioned for that game. There's no way that it is.
Yeah.
And I think that these games, get a bad reputation coming out of the gate bad, but are able to turn it around. But that narrative is sort of going away. Like, a lot of games have managed to do that. Like, Destiny 2 never had the greatest launch and is now fantastic and is now doing pretty well. A lot of people still play it even to this day, still getting more and more content coming out for it. The classic example is Rainbow Six Siege as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
But in recent times, I can't really think of anyone that's done that recently, and I don't really think that it will happen again, because the market now is saturated. Like, if you're looking for a service game, they're there for you. Whereas back then, if you were looking for something like Rainbow Six Siege as a service game, that didn't exist. Your only option was Rainbow Six Siege. So if you were enjoying the core gameplay of that, then you had to wait for them to fix out the rest of the game, basically. But then you came back. But whereas with Anthem, there were other options. You know what I mean? It was supposed to be like Destiny in an Iron Man suit, but Destiny already existed. So when that came out of the gate, crap and rubbish and broken with terrible load times, not a lot of content, annoying choices that just frustrated players. Like, even the fact, I remember one of the big complaints about it was around your hub area, you couldn't run, so you just walked very, very slowly in every single direction, which is just a bizarre choice. So I think that narrative sort of has to go away, which is why when we were speaking about Hyperscape last week, I said to you, do you think that they can turn it around? Because Ubisoft have turned around games in the past. But Hyperscape is now in the Battle Royale game. And the Battle Royale game was oversaturated almost 20 minutes after PUBG first broke the mold. You know what I mean? We've got Fortnite, we've got Apex Legends, we've got PUBG still going strong, you know what I mean? There are options there. So if you didn't come out the gate and hit the ground running and were doing different things with your game, which Ubisoft were, to be fair, like Apex Legends, who did kind of come into that oversaturated market and do something different and maintain an audience, but they came out with a really polished game out the gate, whereas Ubisoft have not done that. Even down to fundamentals of how the game is balanced, they have not done that. I think that these days, when we are overrun with service games, it will be very difficult to get that audience back again, you know?
I think that's, one of the absolute key parts to this is so many publishers have seen the success that is possible if you get a service game right, no matter which kind of variant of it, whether it's Battle Royale or a MOBA or whatever. If you get that right, there is a lot of money on the table. And so that has led to so many publishers trying to make them. And I think often not with any real ingenuity or even a really good idea by and large. I was thinking there, as you were saying, what was the last game that kind of had the we've turned it around narrative, and of the short list of games that I'd kind of drawn up for this discussion, Sea of Thieves is probably the one of those that
that's a good shout, man.
Wasn't a real disaster at launch at all, but just wasn't particularly interesting for a lot of people, and they've worked really hard to turn that game around, and it now has, I think, quite a decent fan base that really like it. But that game is so different to a lot of the other games on this list. And I think that's so much when you look at Crucible, which, as I say, was badly marketed by Amazon by all accounts. But also, it just felt like a cobbling together of ideas that already exist in other games. And you just can't expect to break into a market now where some of these games go on to become massive esports competitions and and have that whole section of the industry cornered, or they become Fortnite or Apex Legends where people are, or Rocket League, where you want to just be there all the time and all your mates are there, and to try and get them to move to something else, as exactly as you described it, in such a saturated market, I think is a huge problem. And if your game just doesn't cut through and offer something new and interesting, why is anyone going to give you the time?
Well, interestingly, I think that what Crystal Dynamics and what Square Enix were hoping was going to be the difference in their game was that it was going to have superheroes in it. It was going to have the fucking Avengers in it. And they thought that was going to be a big enough draw to keep people around. But it's not. Like, you can't have superficial reasons to stick around like that. I mean, playing a game as Spider-Man is fucking awesome, but if the game's shit, I'm not interested in it. You have to have a core game there that is good. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter what the aesthetic is. You have to have a core game there that is good. And it sounds like, in terms of story, Crystal Dynamics have sort of got it in the ballpark, at least. Like, they've got a half-decent story there. But in terms of this service side of it, which is where so many of them fall down, they have not, and it's just grindy and horrible, and at the end of it all, there's not any rewards, there's not anything else to be going for. You're just grinding for the sake of grinding. The players don't have the in-game content there. It's just grinding for grinding's sake. I think that is probably the second place that they fall down. I mean, for kickoff, they've got to work out the gate and they've got to hit the ground running. I think that's really important, particularly now. despite the fact that we've seen games turned around in the past, the content has to be there. Like, it has to be there from the get-go. And if it's not, even if your game is good, then you will struggle to maintain an audience long term, because what is there long term if you don't have in-game content, you know?
Well, that's it, exactly. To me, that certainly with the Avengers, but for a lot of these games, and I'll kind of circle around this point a wee bit, I think that is the fundamental issue, is that it feels baffling to me that the Avengers has been left in a position where they're having to make a statement a month after release to say there is content coming, because as I say, I was aware that there was content coming and I don't play that game, and so there's a real disconnect there between what players want and what the developers or the publishers seem to think that they want. I was thinking about this the other day, and I don't know enough about the development cycle to be fair, but do they just need another team that is solely working on post-game content, that is not involved really in the day-to-day build of the base game, so that you have a whole team of people putting together missions that people can play as soon as they've beaten it? Maybe that is what's going on, but it does feel a bit like these games, which are, you know, right on the front of the box. It's like, service game, you can play this, you get your pals together and play this game for a long time. Days after release, there's nothing left to do that's of any interest. That, to me, feels like a fairly substantial part of your development team, that's what their job is, you know? And if it is, then they need to tighten up the dates. They have to make sure that content is coming, you know, days and weeks after launch, not months, you know?
Well, Liz, I think if there's anything we do know about game development, is that it is very difficult, and on the run-up to releasing a game, you need absolutely all hands on deck getting that game done and finished. So perhaps that is a bit idealised to have this separate nebulous team over here just dealing with post-game content. But what I would say is that in the initial development of the game, if you are not concurrently also developing the next bit of content, because as we've seen here, even with something like the Avengers, even with a property that huge, people get bored quickly. As we've said again and again and again here, this is a saturated market. People have loads of options. Like, to stick around with you have to be delivering them things at a pretty fast clip. And if you don't have things like a battle pass ready to go, or if you don't have the next bit of downloadable content coming in the next month, say, and you have a firm release date very shortly after the game comes out, then you will lose players. You might get some of them back for those things, but as you continue to drop bits of DLC in that manner, you will soon find that the amount of players coming back time and time again will be smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and you will always find it difficult to get a new audience in as well, which I think is another sort of problem with these games. Like, I don't know anybody who could just start playing Destiny 2 now, for example. You know what I mean? It's sort of too far gone, but at the same time, you need to be building that hardcore fan base as well. And if you don't have that content ready for them, then you'll never get that hardcore fan base in there in the first place, which means that you'll just be bleeding players all the time, to the point where a year from now, is anybody playing Marvel's Avengers? You know, is anybody playing it?
And not unless they turn it around, yeah. And I think with Avengers and multiple of the games that we're talking about here, really, the fact that you need, or you really ought to have, a kind of group of players as well, it doubles that issue, because, like you say, when you start bleeding players from the lobbies, you can't even then team up properly. Even just in an individual basis, of your 4 friends that you were originally playing with, you can now only get 2 of them to commit to playing, you know, and that exactly.
It affects the core functionality of the game. It affects it at its base level, which means that even for the people who are sticking around, they can't get match made, and then they get fed up, and then they leave. You know what I mean? It's a horrible self-fulfilling prophecy. And then,
absolutely.
You know,
I think that there's something really interesting there in that balance between content, player engagement, and also just the basic structure of how these games often work, i.e. squad-based. I mean, that was the reason I dropped off Division 2, for example, was that I wanted to be able to play that game alone as much as I wanted to be able to play it with other people. I wonder, do you think that there's space for essentially a single player online service game where content could just be added seasonally, as it is with a lot of these games, but that there isn't such a requirement for you to be constantly linking up with other people, and thereby the number of concurrent players doesn't matter quite so much?
To be honest with you, I think that game could probably quite easily exist. However, I do think that also flies in the face of the ethos of these games in the first place. Do you know what I mean? The point is to get online with your friends, have shared experiences, and having an online single-player game that is service-based. I'm not sure how many people would respond particularly positively to that. I know that me and you would, because we are antisocial and don't like playing games online. But in general, would you rather have that game, that service story game, or would you rather just have a tailored single player experience, you know?
I guess I'm imagining it as somewhere between the two things, like, i.e. that you have the Avengers base game, which had, by all accounts, a really good story that you could play single player, and then you just get story content released on a much kind of faster schedule than...
So sort of like quick fire DLC sort of thing.
Potentially, yeah, like almost an episodic structure. I mean, there would still be time in between that, but if you've got enough content and enough other things to do in the game where you can grind, maybe it still would have multiplayer modes or whatever. I guess partly the reason I'm driving in that direction is that of all the games that I've listed here, other than, say, Fortnite as being a huge success in this realm, GTA Online is the biggest, the most successful version of any of this. And
sort of, yeah. And you can do a lot of stuff by yourself in that game.
Yeah, you totally can. You could be in a lobby of entirely strangers and you don't have to be mic'd up or anything. You can just be playing Grand Theft Auto effectively, but in a different setting than the base narrative game has. And I just think, could the next Spider-Man game, say, follow that model where just every month there's another little chapter added, and in between times there's some challenges and some new collectibles added, and that would lead players like you and I, who don't play these types of games very often, to get more invested in that service model, To be honest with you, Lewis, I think that's a really interesting idea, actually, and taking that GTA Online model, which a lot of people haven't done because open world games like that generally don't function very well as online games, whereas GTA does. So you would have to sort of tailor make it with that in mind. But yeah, that's a really interesting idea where you could just have your own experiences within that world. And I know you can do this in like old school MMOs like Warcraft and whatever. You can just fuck off on your own and do whatever you want, you know what I mean? But also come together and do things collectively as well, whether that be just a deathmatch or go on a raid and work cooperatively towards a task. So yeah, maybe I would like to see that, actually. The more I'm thinking about that, maybe I would like to see that. Maybe I would be interested to see what comes of a model like that where it would be focusing on the story, the single player story, as a service as well, which I don't really think that we've seen before. No. So if someone out there wants to do that, you can contact me and Lewis and we'll sort you out with a couple of ideas. Or if you know of one then we've just not heard of it, let us know that too. I would be really keen to see if anyone is doing this kind of thing already.
Yeah, absolutely, man, absolutely. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll have to call it a day there. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerSToo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really, really, really helps us out. I know I say this every week, twice a week, but it does not become less important on a weekly basis. And while you're over there, if you could take 5 more seconds to give us a little review as well. Again, it just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. It is massively helpful, and I cannot overstate how much it helps us out. So if you could take that 5 seconds to give us 5 stars, it would really mean a lot. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Tacoma, which I've still not started, but I'm very, very much looking forward to. I was sort of planning on finishing off Bloodborne and then getting around to it, but I might have to take a break to actually play that game. And to be honest with you, it might be welcome at that point.
Yeah, that's exactly how I'm feeling about it. It's going to break up some Hollow Knight drudgery for me, I think so.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, well, on that note, we will see you next week.
Thanks.